So what we're going to talk about today is actually deciding between multidimensional and tabular. Talk a little bit about both of those different options and why you would pick one over the other. So just a little bit of information about me. My name is Jessica Moss. I am a data architect. I am actually a SQL Server MVP for Microsoft for the past 6 years. And really because I've participated in a lot of data warehousing and business intelligence solutions and really enjoy sharing what I've learned. And some of the places that I share that information is Twitter, my webpage, and then several of the books that I've helped write, which you can see on the screen. But what we're going to be talking about today is analysis services. And we'll start by going into a little bit of history, where analysis services has come from and where we've gone over the past several years. Then we'll dig into multidimensional, talk about what that model is and do a demonstration. And we'll then switch over to tabular, talk about that, how to design, deploy, and then use that. And then finally, comparing those two models and how we would pick the right model moving forward. So starting with the background of analysis services, let's talk about what this is that we're talking about. And really, analysis services is a semantic modeling tool. And what that means is that we create a database, a tool that allows end users to look at that data in a way that makes sense to them, rather than some oddball database schema which could have weird names or values in it that are perfect for a database and storing information there. We really want to put that into a fashion that end users can understand. So by doing this, we actually have this abstraction layer between those underlying databases and your end users, the tools that they use to look at this data on a regular basis. In addition, that abstraction layer will pre-aggregate the information for fast querying. So it's going to make sure that if you wanted to grab a sales profit for the entire year, that information is there, available, right when you want it, rather than having to go and pull all of it together and do a whole bunch of chugging through, and information is available. Also, it's going to store pre-built calculations for you. So if you have any values or really formulas that you want to do on a regular basis, you can put that into this business layer so that all of your end users or report writers do not have to keep rebuilding that every time. So when you put all of this together, you've really got this way for end users to get that information and analyze it really quickly. And it ends up being something that your end users really enjoy using. This is part of analysis services, or sorry, part of SQL Server. It's one of the services that is included. And you can think of it as an analytical and reporting tool. It actually is a service on a server that you install. Contains your databases, cubes. Those are the actual objects that you're going to be accessing when you're using this service. If you think of the ecosystem of your data landscape, analysis services is actually kind of in the middle of things, where in the typical data warehouse setup or land, you have your source systems. That could be your transactional systems, operational, point of sale, supply chain type systems, finance systems. And then you pull that information together. And that could be into a data warehouse, an operational data store, putting that information into one place so that it's accessible. The next step is this analysis services processing and having that database layer there. And that's where you do that conversion that we've been talking about, making it business friendly, aggregating that information, adding your calculations. That's going to be that red block that you see on the screen is going to be your analysis services. And then finally, down at the bottom, you have your access layer. It's where your end users can really get that data out through reporting or Excel. So when we're talking about all of this, Microsoft has been involved in business intelligence, data warehousing for quite a few years. And actually, analysis services started back. SQL Server 7 had a tool called OLAP services. And This was a lighter version of the analysis services that we know today. But they, I believe, acquired it from another company and incorporated it in SQL Server, renamed it to Analysis Services in 2000. And it was a good little product. It was a good start into the OLAP tools, into analysis services. But they went ahead and made a big change. Kind of the next leap that they made was when they went to SQL Server 2005. That was their big push into business intelligence. They redid a lot of their tools, including analysis services. And this is the multidimensional model that we know today. So if you've used analysis services from the 2005 and later era, multidimensional is going to be more of what you're used to there. Did some enhancements in that 2008 range as well, but pretty solid product at that point. Well, then came 2010, and that's our next big release, was the 2008 R2 release. And 2008 R2, Microsoft released Power Pivot. And Power Pivot included a technology that was a in-memory columnar data store. They actually released it inside of Excel and proposed it as a data mashup tool. You can take gobs of data from all of your sources, all of your different places, and push it all together, and they almost touted it as it could be the end of all the databases. Excel was your world, is what it seemed like, and it really was. It was a semantic model. You bring everything together, could rename it, create calculations, but it was all inside of Excel. So the rest of us business intelligence folks went, hold on a second. We've been trying to get users out of Excel for how many years? And now we're going to put them back in Excel? Well, this is all well and good if we're talking about self-service BI. But what if we then want to corporatize this model that they've spent all this time and created and put work into? What do we do then? So Microsoft listened and said, you are right. In the next version of analysis services in 2012, this is the final bubble on our screen, they released Analysis Services Tabular, which is essentially that Power Pivot Excel model, but it is a service as part of SQL Server now. So we still have our multidimensional analysis services that's been around for a while, but we also have this new tabular model introduced in 2012. So that really gets us to the point now of we have both of these different models, both of them available in SQL Server, both semantic models. Which one do we want to use? So let's start by looking at multidimensional. So as we mentioned, multidimensional started in about 2005 in the kind of the way we know of it today. And it is an OLAP cube, online analytical processing cube. And it allows us to have the semantic model layer. It's going to be available in most of your editions of SQL Server, Standard, BI, Enterprise. Of course, as you get to more of the Enterprise editions there, you're going to have a few more features, things like your partitions and things like that. But most of the functionality is even going to be in your Standard version. And as part of your multidimensional database, you're going to have several different objects, data sources, which link to your underlying data. That's where you get your information in. Your cubes, which are going to contain the aggregated values, things that you want to add up, things that you want to aggregate, and then all of your dimensions, which are the things you want to do your slicing and dicing by of your data, your properties, your dimensions. Now, when we're talking about a multidimensional database, the big thing is that underlying data really needs to be a data warehouse or a dimensional data model. That dimensional data model is going to have your facts in the middle and your dimensions around it so that it can connect to all of those different slicing and dicing objects. And you can bring that data in from a variety of relational databases. Access, SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata. Essentially, if you can go ahead and connect to it with that OLADB provider, you can pull that in. Now, when we're talking about bringing that information in, you've got a couple of ways of getting that information from those sources. MOLAP, which is going to be your multidimensional, ROLAP is your relational, and then WHOLAP is going to be your hybrid version. So your MOLAP multidimensional version actually brings in all of the information into your analysis services database so that it can, and your aggregations, so that when the end user or the client tool accesses that data, it's going to go right to the database to pull it to the analysis services database to return that information. ROLAP, on the other hand, is going to actually use analysis services as a pass-through mechanism, where the client tool or the end user will hit that database, and then the analysis services database will convert it and reach into the underlying data source, get the information it needs, and then pass it back. WHOLAP, or your hybrid, is going to be, as it sounds, a hybrid of the two of them, where it goes ahead and stores its aggregations within the analysis services database. But if you want to go down to any kind of lower level of detail, that's when it goes back to the underlying data source and gets more information. As you can expect, multidimensional is going to be a lot faster for the end user. But ROLAP will always have the latest information because it's hitting the underlying data source directly. Other factors to consider with that are processing time, real time, and query time. And then finally, when we're talking about multidimensional, the other big difference is the query language. And the query language for multidimensional data is multidimensional expressions, also known as MDX. And MDX is a fun language to learn. It looks very similar to SQL in that it has select statements, from statements, where clauses. However, it really is not like a SQL statement. And it makes sense. If you think of regular SQL, you are returning a data set that has rows and columns. MDX, from analysis services, is returning a data set that could have any number of axes. It has rows, columns, pages, sets, and it just keeps going. So you've got to have a language that can encapsulate all of those different types of axes. And a good way of thinking of it is what we typically call or think of a multidimensional data set coming back is a cube, and that you do have those different axes and different ways of thinking about it. The nice thing about any of the client tools that go against analysis services is that a lot of the tools have provided a interface, a GUI, that allows you to drag and drop your values, and it's going to create the MDX behind the scenes so that you don't have to actually learn the language itself. Reporting services and many of those tools do the similar. So when we're talking about the objects within the multidimensional data source, we have multidimensional database. We have our data sources, views, cubes, and lots of dimensions that we can work with. So let's go ahead. A few of the pros that we have there are going to be our advanced features and properties. Multidimensional has been around quite some time, versus the tabular, which everything gets loaded into memory for fast querying. Multidimensional does not pull everything in, so we're not limited there. It can use its dimension and cell level security, so it breaks that down to a very low level. And finally, if you are doing anything where you're using Excel to write back and push information back into the cube, that's something that multidimensional has for you. So let's go ahead and take a look at multidimensional. And I have got a VM set up. And we have I'm actually running SQL Server 2014, but I'm using AdventureWorks for the 2012 version because the 2014 AdventureWorks was not yet out when I set all of this up. But it's very similar and it's still running under 2014. So what we're actually going to see here is we're going to start through our development process. So looking at the development side of multidimensional and what that looks like, taking it through, pushing that up to the server, what that looks like, and then how the end user is going to access it and what they will see. So what we see on our screen here is the SQL Server Data Tools Business Intelligence, part of SQL Server 2014, that allows us to do our development. If I were to go ahead and start my development, I could go ahead and create a new project, which is going to be my Business Intelligence Tools. This is what I get by creating it. And under my Business Intelligence section, I can see all of the different tools I have. Specifically here, the multidimensional, which is what we're going to look at first. And then we're going to see we have our tabular, which is what we'll look at second. So for these enterprise versions, we can go ahead and set up our projects within this tool. Now behind the scenes, SQL Server Data Tools is just Visual Studio. So you've got access to hook this up to source control and any of your schema compares, your versions, deployment, automated deployments, all of that as well. What we're going to look at here is the cube that's already been designed, but we'll go ahead and show you what the different pieces are of that cube and how you would go through that. Now initially when you go to create this cube, there is a wizard that you can point to your data source and pull in a lot of that data. It will do a lot of this for you, but then there'll be tweaks that you'll want to make as you go through. So to give you a little bit of idea, the different data sources that we have available to us. I mentioned any of your OLADB providers, and you can see those listed right at the top there. Oracle, Teradata, I mentioned a few of those. That's where you're able to pull your data in to the multidimensional model. Now it's important for it to be in that star schema, that dimensional model. In that data source view, our next object, that's where you're going to see all of the tables that you brought in and how they get connected to each other. So for example, I have my finance facts, and I can see that they are hooked up to my dimensions such as a scenario, a department, and an account, and that's going to be my star schema view of things. Once all that data has been pulled in from my data source, and the data source view says what the information is, then I have the metrics, the calculations, the values, the thing that make up the semantic model. So over on the left, you can see the measures pane. And each of these high-level categories, such as internet sales, are going to be my measure groups. And everything below them are going to be my measures or my calculations. You can see some of them are just 3 bars. That means they come directly from my underlying data source. Or, it's a little fuzzy because I'm using ZoomIt, but some of them have an FX, which means it's a function or an expression. It has been calculated for us. And I could go ahead and add any new set here. I just went ahead and double-click there if I wanted to include measures, modify measures that we have. Down in the bottom left, I'm going to have my dimensions. Dimensions are the things that I want to do my slicing and dicing by. So for example, if I go to my date dimension, I'm going to see all of my values on the left, the attributes, the thing I want to slice and dice by. And over on the right, I have my hierarchies. If I want to do any sort of drill down or drill through of my information, I can go ahead and create these hierarchies here to allow that to happen. I can see how everything is related through the Dimension Usage tab. It's going to show those dimensions on the left, my measure groups or my facts across the top, and then what ties them together in each of the boxes that are linked in between each row and column. I want to go ahead and show you calculations. This is where we go ahead and define that information from within the business, the calculations that we want to create. So for example, if I go ahead to Internet Gross Profit, it's a calculation that was made, one of those measures that had the little FX next to it. And in the center area here, we can see that the name of it is going to be my Internet Gross Profit. And this expression here is actually an MDX snippet, and it's just taking two different columns that we have and subtracting them. But this is a common calculation, one that many business users will use quite often. So rather than them having to write it each time in the report, we can create it once here. They can use Internet Gross Profit, less work for them, and we always know that the number is going to be the same because it's using the same calculation. A few of the things that Analysis Services provides, multidimensional, that not as much as the Tabular does not. One of them is actions, and action is a way for you to perform an action, trying to describe it without actually using the word, do something that based on that measure or that value. So in this case, it's actually going to be a URL. This is a city map. So on our city value in one of our dimensions, if somebody goes ahead and right-clicks on that and says perform the action, go to link, it's actually going to open up a web page that will direct you to MSN Maps and show you where that city is. So it's a neat functionality that you have there if the client tool allows you to have it. Okay, so once we've gone ahead and created this model, done our development, we can go ahead and deploy that up to our server. And we can get to our server just by going to Management Studio, connecting to an Analysis Services server, and I've actually gone ahead and already connected to it, my local host server here. You can see it is multi-dimensional. The bottom, it has the cube looking thing at the bottom. The one right above it is actually the Tabular, so you can kind of see a comparison there where the Tabular has the little blue icon next to it. But it's going to look very similar to what we just saw in our development tool, where we can have our data sources, our cubes, and our dimensions. We could actually go ahead and process it right from here, or set up an automated processing schedule so that it would pull in the information from that underlying data source and populate that information. So this is really where that information is. This can be backed up, monitored, and maintained. And the point of pushing this up to the server is so that we can actually access that information. So we're actually going to use good old Excel for this, and just use Excel 2013, a nice new one, just a regular blank window so you can see how easy this is to get started. And we're going to go ahead to the Data tab because we want to pull in information from Analysis Services. So we're going to go, say, on the Data tab, get external data from other sources, and we're going to be clicking that From Analysis Services icon here. I'm just going to say go to my local machine, but it would be whatever server it is that you have that set up on. And we'll go ahead and just connect to the AdventureWorks cube we were just looking at. I've created this before, so it's just telling me that I have the ODBC connection, or ODC, already created. And let's go ahead and create a pivot table for this. So we'll say OK there. So this is just a regular pivot table here, but because it's hooked up to Analysis Services, it's populated in a way that makes our dragging and dropping very simple to pull the information in. So over on the right in my pivot table fields, I am actually going to go ahead and just show a subset of the fields, make it a little easier for us to see. And we'll go ahead and say Internet Sales. And when we do that, on the top, we can see all of the measures that we were looking at before. I'm about to hit my Internet Gross Profit, that calculation we looked at before. But notice over on the left that we have that empty pivot table just waiting for us to do something. And as I go ahead and hit my Internet Gross Profit, it immediately populates it into my values pane. And over on the left, it actually summed up all of the Internet Gross Profit from the entire database, returned it to us almost instantaneously. So it really shows you some of the power there of that information. And let's go ahead and just to give it a little bit of a comparison, we'll do Internet Sales Amount as well. Bring that as well. And then we want to do some slicing and dicing. So let's go ahead and bring our customer geography down. And we'll put that on our rows. It's going to go ahead and slice it over on the left of pivot table. You can still see everything that it's bringing over. And let's go ahead and drill down into one of them. This is that hierarchy concept we talked about. We'll go ahead and do Florida and Clearwater. Okay, and we have some values there. And notice if I go ahead and right-click on that Internet Sales Amount, I do have additional actions that pop up because I am working in multidimensional. And if I go ahead and click my drill through option there, I'm going to see the underlying data that makes up that value. Okay, so what we saw there was from the multidimensional perspective, information from that underlying data source, our facts, our measures, our hierarchies drilling down, and then actions being able to show that, all in just a couple of clicks for the end user's perspective. Okay, so at this point we're going to flip over to our tabular model. So our tabular model is going to be that thing that we talked about that was our, started out as Power Pivot in 2008 R2, that information that we have. And they really did, when they took it from Power Pivot and turned it into an enterprise multidimensional model, they made sure that they could pull it all in and that it really was enterprise ready there for us, mostly. So it's available in the enterprise editions, business intelligence or enterprise. And underneath, it doesn't have as many objects as the multidimensional that we're talking about. It has our data sources where we're going to get that data from, and then tables. And that's really where all of the data from the underlying data source gets stored in. So unlike the multidimensional model where you really need to have the facts and the dimensions and it's set up in a particular dimensional model, tabular actually allows you to have your data in any kind of fashion, mishmash fashion. And the idea there was from Power Pivot. It was a data mashup tool. They wanted to be able to bring information that people had on their desktop or that they could find from wherever. So we get actually some benefit from that because we can pull in all sorts of different data sources. You still have all of your relational type data sources, Access, SQL Server, Oracle, Teradata. But in addition, we have text files, Excel files, any data feeds, OData feeds that you would have, web services, any ODBC data source you can use to pull in that information. And the information, the way that they store it within the tabular model is through two different options with some variations. But in general, you've got in-memory, where you're going to bring all of that information into the memory of the server. Every time that client hits it, it's going right to memory versus having to pull it from disk or anything like that. Or you do have the direct query option still, where you can pass through the analysis services tabular model and hit the underlying data source. It will return the data and pass it through to the end user of the client tool. Rather than MDX from the multidimensional side of things, Microsoft actually created a new query language here. Because Power Pivot, we were trying to go self-service and really appeal to the end user. And because MDX is, as I mentioned, a little bit difficult to write and understand, they created this new query language called DAX, or Data Analysis Expressions. And it is very Excel-like. It actually uses a lot of the Excel formulas that you would use in Excel, but they have added some new functions, some new functionality to allow you to better navigate some of the relationships and items within the new model. The nice thing about Tabular is that they added a way to interpret MDX, most of MDX. So if you have a client tool that can use that same GUI interface we were talking about, and it will create MDX behind the scenes, the tabular model will convert it and return the data from the tabular model and back. So you've got some flexibility there. Now when we're talking about the objects within the tabular model, we actually have one model file that contains all of your objects. So this is the one holdover from Excel, is that everything is in one object, which can make it a little more difficult if you have multiple developers working on it, especially if you're tied up in source control, but definitely something to be aware of. So when we're talking about features, I mentioned before that multidimensional has some of the advanced features, because it's been around a little bit longer, versus a tabular. And this is a list of them as of to the 2014 version. And this is actually from Books Online, the link's at the bottom there. And it shows a few of the things that tabular does not have compared to multidimensional. Actions is one of them. We went ahead and showed that earlier with multidimensional. Aggregation objects is one of them. However, the way tabular takes that data, making it in memory and the columnar format, and to give you an idea, that columnar format actually collapses the unique values per column and has an index structure to be able to point and get that information out. So you can actually get high amounts of compression based on that, so that's not as necessary. Any of your custom assemblies or roll-ups, so if you're trying to reference an assembly, a DLL, that you have some other kind of business logic in, that's something you can only do in multidimensional. Moving on down to linked measure groups or many-to-many relationships, something that multidimensional is going to handle right out of the box. And then moving down, we've got translations, which is where we can take a value and convert it to a different language. So if I had a list in English, but certain times I wanted to show that in Spanish, I could do that through the translation functionality on the multidimensional side. And then finally, the write back functionality, which is where we want to push data back into the cube. Excel often allows you to do that, something we can only do now in multidimensional, but not in tabular. This being said, this is as it is right now. Moving forward, there's always the possibility that tabular will gain some of these features and potentially could even gain new features that multidimensional does not have. So based on all of those features, the things that we've talked about, the pros that we have here, tabular is going to be Pretty easy to develop. We don't have to worry about that underlying dimensional model. We are going to get fast querying that we have there. It provides additional data sources. We talked about text files, Excel files, data feeds. Because of that in-columnar format of the way that it compresses data, sometimes you can have higher compression with the tabular model. Totally depends on the data that you're talking about. From a querying perspective, tabular will support most of MDX and DAX. And then if you are doing anything more cloud-based, Power View and Office 365 or Power BI sites can actually be a source for your tabular model. You can pull that data in as well. So let's go ahead and show the tabular model. And we're going to go back to our VM and back to SQL Server Data Tools. But this time we're going to be looking at our tabular model. And the tabular model we have here, we're going to look at our Solution Explorer on the right and show what we did before, which is that we really just have one file that we're working with, that model file, which contains everything. And you can see as we're going to go through this model file looks very much like Excel. Everything that we're going to be looking at should remind you of Excel. So we have our design pane in the middle, which will contain most of the information or the information we're looking at. Or up at the top, we have three different menu items that we're going to be most concerned with: our model, our table, and our column menus. Our model is going to be where we can pull in data from our data source. So if we go ahead and look at importing from our data source to bring it into this model, you can see, as we talked about, all of the different data sources that are available here, many more than multidimensional. If we wanted to change any of our other views, we can go ahead and create some perspectives, look at it in a different format, and so on. When we're talking about tables, this is where we're going to create relationships between all of those tables or manage them, similar to the dimensional usage tab that we saw in the multidimensional model. And then our column allows us to do some of our calculations and values there. So along the bottom, we have each of our tables or tabs that actually show us the data that we pulled in from that underlying data source. So as I click through, I can see each of the data and the columns that are associated with them. And actually, on the bottom there, I can go ahead and see my calculations pane, this guy right here, which will contain any calculations that we want to make to expose through the semantic model layer. Down in the bottom right corner, I'm going to see two buttons. I have a grid button and a diagram button. Grid view and diagram view. Right now we're on grid view, which is all of those tables. If I flip over to diagram view, this is going to look a little bit more like our data source view. And pull that out a little bit more so you can see it. These are each of the tables that we have brought in from that underlying data source, how they are connected, the relationship. So more so in the tabular model than the multidimensional, there's a good chance you won't have the relationships already set up, especially if you're pulling from two different types of sources to pull in tables. And you'll have to actually connect those tables and create those relationships. And the reason I say more so in here than the multidimensional is because the multidimensional is often or is coming from that dimensional star schema model. Those relationships have usually already been made, so the designer will actually pull that in for you, versus here you'll actually have to create them. The other thing that you can create here will be your hierarchies. Go ahead and drill into this geography hierarchy. And we've got one that's already created, country, region, state, province, and city. And I started to create a new one here. And you can just do that by right-clicking on the top for the geography and clicking the Create Hierarchy button. Or the relationships that I was just talking about between tables, you can do that through this as well, or you can do dragging and dropping. So this is a lot of our design interface is going to be through this diagram view. The next thing that we need to do is our calculations, and we can do that back on our grid view. So I'm going to switch over using that button. And the table that I would like to use for this will be my internet sales data. So I'm going to switch down to my tab at the bottom. And there's two things I need to do. The first one is going to be my gross profit calculation. And this is actually something that was calculated for every row. So if I go ahead and click on the gross profit column right there, you're going to see at the top in the function, just like Excel, it actually gives us what the formula is to calculate that gross profit. So in this case, it's taking the sales amount from that same column and subtracting the total product cost. This is a DAX snippet. Looks very Excel-like. Once you have that created for each column, you can then create your aggregation, your measure, which will sum it up for your entire setup. And that is going to be for your entire data set or whatever you've drilled down into. And that's going to be called your internet total gross profit, which I've clicked on down in the bottom within my calculations pane. And up at the top, I can see what that calculation is, and it's actually summing up all of the gross profit, that calculated column we had just created, to give you that final amount. So here we're able to still create those same types of calculations similar to multidimensional, just a little bit different way of developing it. Once we've created our entire tabular model, we can go ahead and deploy that up to the server. And if I go to my Management Studio, I can go ahead and show that. Note that I have two instances installed. An analysis services instance can either be multidimensional or tabular, not both. So I'm going to go to my tabular instance, named so because it is set up to be a tabular analysis services. And you can notice the little blue icon there, so we are looking at that. And when it deploys up, it's going to show you your connection that you have, and then each of the tables or what looked like those tabs in our designer for our information. So it might look like Excel when it's in the designer, but when you push it up to the server, it is a server object. It is a database which can be maintained, backed up, processed, so on and so forth. So to go ahead and connect to this now from a developer and user type of perspective, we can go ahead and pull up Excel again, start totally fresh, blank workbook, and you might get a little feeling of deja vu because we're going to do a few things very similarly. Starting with going to our Data tab to insert some data. So we'll go to Data and say Get External Data from other sources, and this is just from Analysis Services, same as we did before. A little bit different, we're going to have to make sure we connect to our tabular instance on our local machine. And we'll go ahead and connect to the cube that we have up there and create a pivot table. And we've gone ahead and had that pivot table pop up. Over on the left, we have our empty table, and on the right, we can see our values, which are similar to our measures, and then each of our dimensions are below that. So let's go ahead and pull in that internet total gross profit. Here we go. Looks like a very similar number. And we'll also do our internet total sales to do a little bit of comparison there. If we scroll down to our geography information, we have our hierarchy that was created before. So we can go ahead and pull that down to our rows. Notice that this is coming back very quickly as well, just as quickly, if not faster, than our multidimensional, aggregating that information for us. Over on the left, I can go ahead and drill down into our United States, Florida, Clearwater that we have there. Notice if I try to right-click on that value and go to additional actions, I have no actions defined, just because Tabular does not have that ability. But I do have my hierarchy and all of that information. So if we actually go ahead and do a quick little compare between the two that we were just looking at, what we're going to see is that we really end up with the same set of information there. We had one extra layer in the tabular side, but the information that we're getting is the same. And if we go ahead and look at the top level, the grand total, we're going to see the same kind of information there as well. So from the end user perspective here, these are going to be very similar types of information. So at this point, we have seen our multidimensional model and our tabular model, seen the differences in developing, understand the differences between the underlying data sources, how we would do the development, how we would push it up, how the end user feels about things. So which one are we talking about? Well, really, it depends. I know that's not the answer you all came for, but it's going to be based a lot on your organization and your priorities. So the types of things that it depends on are your available SQL version and the edition that you're running on. If you are using 2012 or later, and if you are using the BI edition, Business Intelligence, or Enterprise editions, then Tabular is on the table. Anything prior or less than that, you're only looking at multidimensional. If you know that from an underlying data source perspective, you need to have a series of OData feeds coming in, and you don't want to create an additional layer of integration services, pulling it in and manipulating it, Tabular is really something you're going to want to look at. If your client tool only writes DAX, multidimensional does not understand DAX, so you'll want to look at Tabular. Some of your advanced features that we talked about, your aggregations, your actions, any of the write-back functionality, if those are important to you, you're going to want to look more at your multidimensional side of things. Depending on the amount of server that you have, or the amount of memory you have on your server, Tabular needs to get uploaded into memory, the entire database, all of the data. If you have a limited amount of memory on your servers, you may want to look more at multidimensional than Tabular. And then absolutely, last thing here, is what you currently have at your organization. If you have a whole team of staff that know multidimensional, maybe you should go multidimensional. If you have existing solutions that have been created in Tabular, then maybe you should look at continuing on with Tabular. So you're really going to want to evaluate these. There's actually, while creating the presentation, tried to create a flow chart of if you have this, then you should go this way, and then if you have this, you should go this way. The problem is if you have a client tool that only understands DAX and you really have a desire for actions, those will not work with both. So you really have to define which one of those is more important to you, and then once you've done that, you're going to start to lean towards one or the other. So the big thing here is to understand the differences, and then you'll be able to make your decision. Really, when we're talking about both of them, they have their benefits and their disadvantages. They're going to be really similar for you. As long as you pay attention to what those differences are, you're not going to be sorry going either way. Understand what your needs are from the analysis perspective, how they fit into both of the models, and then you just got to pick the model that makes the most sense for your organization. And that actually wraps up what I have here. I'm happy to take questions, Liz, if that will work, or at this point I'll turn it back over to you.
Yep, we've got a lot of questions, so I'll go ahead and start reading them off.
Great.
All right. Can you touch on how to automatically populate the last processed field for a cube?
How to, I'm sorry, say it again?
How to automatically populate the last processed field?
I'm guessing what we're talking about here is the date, the time that the cube was last processed. And to do that, typically when I'm doing it, I'm creating some sort of automated process to do that, so I've got that value there. So that's probably the route that I would go if that's what we're talking about, but not 100% sure there.
Okay. Is it possible to have a tabular instance and a multidimensional instance simultaneously on the same SSAS instance?
No, you cannot have them together. Actually, when you do the install, it's going to ask you which one you want, either multidimensional or tabular. However, on the same server, you can have two instances, and one can be multidimensional and one can be tabular.
Okay. Do tabular data sources require a primary key for the rigor establishing relationships or not?
Do they require a primary key for establishing them? When we're talking about creating the relationships, well, the table itself does not have to have a primary key. But when it comes in to tie it to another table, that is going to have a link to that other table for those to be able to match up so that it knows what it can link together. In that case, it has to be one column. So if you have multiple columns within the table that would make up your unique business key, you can concatenate them together or whatever you need to do to be able to tie it to that other table. Or if coming in you can have a surrogate key, primary key to be able to do that, that may serve you better in the long run.
Okay. I heard that multidimensional and tabular model cannot coexist in the same SQL server. Is that true?
If we're talking about the instancing thing, correct, but you can have them both on the same SQL server very happily, just as different instances. And actually that's what we were looking at today. They were very happy together for the demo.
Okay. Can we use multiple data sources for the tabular model?
Can you use multiple data sources for tabular? Absolutely. And that's often how tabular is used because you'll pull in data from your data warehouse plus a feed that someone else has plus an Excel spreadsheet. The important part there is creating those relationships and making sure that they're going to link and tie together appropriately. But yep.
Okay. Tabular in Microsoft SQL or in Excel Power Pivot, what is the advantage of one over the other?
Power Pivot in Excel versus SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular. Think of Power Pivot as your little brother or little sister. That is your self-service model. That is where your end users can play with their data. A lot of times that's a great way to prototype combining data together and see if it even makes sense. As soon as that data, that model, becomes something that the enterprise needs, that's when it needs to go to SQL Server Analysis Services Tabular. It needs to be on a server so that it can be backed up, maintained, and managed by your enterprise. If you don't, you risk losing your Excel file on somebody's desktop. That's probably the big differences, but that could probably be a whole new presentation itself.
All right. If you can create expressions in DAX, how do you decide whether to create a calculated column versus a measure?
Your calculated columns are going to be per row that's coming out. So if it's something that you can do to add up certain columns or subtract certain columns, that's something you can do as a calculated column. On the client tool frame, you can still take that calculated column and sum it or average it, any of your DAX formulas there. If you need something that's going to go subsets of columns, or you want to sum a group here and then filter a set of the rows to do something else, any of your date type calculations, things like that, those are going to be your measures. So think of your calculated columns as just a new value that you'd like to manipulate some of your data there, versus your measure is going to be if you're doing more of your advanced calculations.
Okay. Any workaround for drill down in tabular model?
Any workaround for drill down in tabular? I mean, I would just use the hierarchy capable, the drill through, I'm sure is what they're talking about, getting that detailed data. Any workaround to getting that drill through the action data? That's a good question. It would probably have to be on the client tool side, where you'd essentially recreate an action that would point to either a report or another aspect of that client tool that would do that. Or you could always have a tabular model that just showed that detail to pull it all the way through. If you included it in there, you could link that as well. But it would really have to depend there on which way you were trying to go with it.
Okay. All right. Looks like we're out of time. There are a lot of questions that we didn't get to, so maybe I can send them over to Jessica and she can do a follow-up blog or something and we can post about it. But if you have any questions in the meantime, Jessica's email is on the screen, and as always, you can email me, Liz, directly at lhamilton@pragmaticworks.com with any questions. All right. Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, everybody, for attending the webinar.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.